the St. Louis Visionary Awards, next on City Corner. Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson and welcome to City Corner. The St. Louis Visionary Awards has just announced their honorees for 2020. And today we're going to learn more about these 6 outstanding women and their contribution to the arts, as well as the big event that's coming up on April 27th. I want to welcome my first guest to the show, Roseann Weiss and Pat Smith-Thurman, who are board members for the St. Louis Visionary Awards. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to see you. I know I've interviewed you both before, and it's always lovely to talk about the arts with you both. But let's kind of focus everything coming up on the big event on the 27th and talk about this year's honorees.
Yes, I have my cheat sheet, so I'm just gonna use my cheat sheet here.
That's fine.
So we have, again, 6 amazing women. It happens every year. We always think, are there gonna be all these nominations? And there's an amazing number of nominations. So our community impact artist this year is Paisha Elaine Anderson, who's an amazing spoken word artist. Emerging artist is Ellie Balk, who I think you'll hear from later. Outstanding working artist is Catherine Bentley, who is in theater and does things all over town and actually all over the world. And Lifetime Achievement Award, which we don't always give, is to Hanini Hilberg, and he co-founded the Hispanic Festival, which happens every year.
Okay.
And then the major contributor to arts is Linda Lee, who has just such a passion for the arts here in town. And then finally is Lisa Melandri, who is director of the Contemporary Art Museum here in St. Louis.
And you set it up perfectly. We're going to be talking with Ellie and Lisa in the second segment. We do have a photo. You guys always do a great photo, group photo, and that I want to make sure that we put up as we talk about it. Pat, when I teased it a bit, saying women in the arts and their outstanding contributions to the arts, but tell me a bit more about the Visionary Awards. I mean, why was it started? And besides honoring women in the arts, let's talk about the importance of that.
Well, first of all, I'd like to give honor to the 2 women who had the vision to begin with, and that is Kim Eberlein and Sarah Burke. They co-founded the organization and spearheaded it, and it took off. It's all about celebrating those achievements and the contributions of women in the St. Louis area. And when you think about it, it gives girls something to look up to. And that's what they're all about. It's all about the celebration and the different areas. And as she mentioned, the arts educators, art performers, emerging artists, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, it's a great award, and I think it really does highlight the work that women are doing in the arts here in St. Louis. The event itself is very fun. A lot of people come out for this. It's kind of this great chance to catch up with people who are in the arts. Let's talk about the event. This year it's going to be on Monday, May 27th. So what can we expect?
Starts at 6 p.m.
Okay.
And it's an hour program, and it's a great program. We don't go on and on. I want people to know that, because you come and before you know it, it's over. So every one of the awardees gets to tell us a little bit about themselves and to say why they are in the arts and what's inspired them. And that's inspiring to be in the audience. And this year we have Tanina, who is a wonderful performer, who will perform, and then also Ashley Lane's dance troupe. Okay. So we're very excited. It'll be a really interesting program. And then there's a party.
Yeah, we're looking at some photos. So, I mean, I think you've outlined it perfectly. If you go, you hear from the honorees, the awardees, but then this is from 2018, but when Kim Massey performed, but there's also the arts performances that are sort of incorporated into the evening, and so it's really something special. Pat, you were going to add something after that.
There's my picture. I was just going to say that it's a very diverse group of people. I'm always amazed, because I came from corporate America, at how many corporations are involved in the arts now. You can go there and see people from the Hispanic community, from the Bosnian community, African Americans. It's huge. We cast a wide net, and we're very proud of it.
No, it is a really fun event, and just the way that it's put together, and then the reception afterwards. You mentioned the nomination and the selection process, and I wanted to get a bit more into that, because I'm actually not. I don't actually know how that happens. So tell me about the whole selection process.
Sure. So we put out that we're looking every year for these categories, and we are always amazed. You know, between Pat and I bet we think we know everybody in the art world, but we don't. And it's wonderful to get all of these nominations. And then there's a selection committee, separate from the board of directors of the organization. So that selection committee reads all of the nominations. You know, before I was on the board, I had been on a selection committee, and we really discussed it, really sort of looked at who's here, who's doing what. And it's hard because there's many more than 6 women that we want to honor, which means every year after year we're gonna have plenty of people to honor, and it's really exciting, and it's a lot of fun.
No, I can imagine it's a hard selection process just because there are so many women working in the arts and doing a fantastic job. I know a couple years back the Regional Arts Commission had pulled some statistics, and I thought they were really strong. They were just talking about how strong and vibrant the arts community is, and they were saying 590 million in economic activity that's generated through St. Louis's arts and culture industry, and that it draws more than 11 million people to the arts and culture events each year. And so when you dig a little deeper, you see women are a huge, huge part of that. I was curious if you had any thoughts to kind of add to that. That's obviously looking at the economic impact, but anything else to add to that?
Well, I mean, one of the things I want to say is that the arts are an amazing part of our ecosystem, because just the not-for-profit arts in St. Louis is 19,000 full-time equivalent jobs. And that's a lot of jobs. So I don't like to always talk about the arts that way, but I think we need to. It's part of what happens here. And as you say, more people go to arts events than they do to sports events. And that's a really important part of our whole fabric of culture here in St. Louis.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, you're going to say
I was
something.
just going to add to that the Visionary Awards really are all about the women. And I'm married to a professional artist, so he and I talk about this all the time. He sees women as just coming into the fold in the early 1900s, because there were a lot of women out there that were artists, but they were not celebrated. They were teachers, they taught artists, they pushed them out, but now women are part of the mainstream. And what that does for St. Louis, it allows us to grow as a cultural city. And you're going to hear more about this from Lisa as well, about the impact of cultural organizations. But the Visionary Awards sort of pushes that forward by celebrating everyone.
I think it's something sometimes you take for granted, because if you're sort of in the art circles, most of the people you know, a lot of them are women, and so you naturally assume that they're clearly doing big things, and you know it, but to your point, it's the recognition of the impact that they're actually making is sometimes overlooked and not necessarily there. You both worked in the arts with the Regional Arts Commission, the Gallery, 10th Street Gallery. I mean, when you're bringing all these years of your personal experience, how does that kind of tie in together with the Visionary Awards? I mean, you've kind of already mentioned it in terms of the importance, but is there anything that kind of strikes you in terms of your past experience and the now being involved with the Visionary Awards?
You know, I received a Visionary Award in the same category Lisa is getting it in, an outstanding arts professional, which was amazing to me. No one does the work they do because they think they're going to get an award. This is an industry in which we are there because we have a passion for it. And I always say we can't do anything else. You know, I have tried to be in the corporate world, and I came running back to the arts because it was where I belong. It is my home. And I think that so many people involved in the arts, that's what it's about. It's about being able to hold the expression for our communities and be able to hold all the beauty, all the suffering, all the things that art can show us. I think that's what we all do, and I think women have been doing that for a long time.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's a good point. Were you going to add anything else to that,
Yes,
Pat?
I was. Coming from corporate America, I was in technology, and I retired. And married to an artist, they used to call us art and science. And I think I've come full circle now, because as you're going to hear from Ellie Balk, she is one of the rare artists that can take the math side and the artistic side and put it all together. And I have been looking for her for 10 years, and she's here, so I'm really...
She's here, she's a few feet away.
So I'm really excited. I mean, I know her, I know of her work, but this is the first time I've met her. But that's where we're headed now in the world. You're going to see more corporations feed into that level of creativity. We're seeing it in graphic design, but that's going to continue, where the lines between, it used to be STEM, now it's STEAM, that it's going to be blurred pretty soon.
That's interesting. I'm sure too, just over the years, you're able to see your lens at seeing the changes and what's kind of going on in the arts industry. It's really interesting. Anything that you're seeing particular, you just mentioned obviously that here in St. Louis, anything else that you're seeing, Roseann, from your perspective of what's happening in St. Louis, to piggyback on what Pat said?
Yeah, I think that there's a real recognition now of how arts are part of community development. Not just in the public art realm, but in neighborhoods and in communities, that people understand that art is everywhere, and it's an expression, and that there are artists working specifically in neighborhoods. Paisha Elaine Anderson, for instance, one of the artists who's one of our honorees, works in the Cherokee neighborhood, and she works in several different ways that way as a spoken word artist, and she's working with youth. So those kinds of things are I think we're going to see more and more of, that there are people on the hyper-local, the micro level working in neighborhoods with the arts, and that it's not just in the institutions, that it's everywhere.
No, that's a great point. Before we wrap up for the first segment, I do want to mention you've got co-hosts this year, and we've got some photos of them. So we've got Tanya Beasley-Jolly, who people know in the arts, especially in the fashion area, and then Penny Pennington, is that correct? So tell me, the co-hosts are going to just help sort of MC the night, and then they...
Yes, so they are amazing, two amazing women.
They are.
And Penny is president of Edward Jones, who is one of our sponsors, along with Centene and Wells Fargo. And so, you know, we're very excited to have them. They are supporters of the arts, and we're excited to be invited to be our co-hosts.
Yeah, no, it sounds like another, I mean, I come to this event, try to come every year, and it's really, really wonderful. And so it's going to be another exciting year. So thank you both for coming on and talking about it. We're going to cut to a graphic which details the event coming up on April 27th. It's the 2020 St. Louis Visionary Awards, as we mentioned, co-hosted by Tanya Beasley-Jolly and Penny Pennington. Tickets are available, and you can head to visawards.org to get those tickets, or if you have any questions, call 314-289-4108. You can also follow the Visionary Awards on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. That's their handle, at STL Viz Awards. But don't go anywhere. We're actually going to talk to two of this year's honorees coming up in our next segment. So we'll be right back, and keep it right here on STL TV. We'll be right back.
Botanical Garden is loved by green thumbs and non-gardening types alike because you can play. You can relax. And there's always something new to experience, no matter the time of day or the season. And learn about conservation and one-of-a-kind plants. So come and experience St. Louis.
About St. Louis is the 79 unique neighborhoods nestled into 108 city parks, including Forest Park, which is actually larger than Central Park in New York, and of course, the beautiful Tower Grove Park where I'm at now. Oh, the St. Louis Blues. We've got the St. Louis Surge, two-time WBCBL champions. We've got Harris Stowe, WashU, St. Louis University, and of course, the 11-time World Series champion, St. Louis Cardinals. So come experience St. Louis.
I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. Today we're talking about the 2020 St. Louis Visionary Awards, and now for this segment, I'm joined by two of this year's honorees. I want to welcome Lisa Melandri and Ellie Balk, and I should mention your designations for your awards. So Lisa, you're being honored as an Outstanding Arts Professional, and Ellie for Emerging Artist Award. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
I know you're both really busy, so I appreciate your time just to come in and just to talk. I mean, this is a great recognition, and in the first segment we were talking about the history of the Visionary Awards and its sort of importance in recognizing the work of women in the arts in St. Louis. So, Lisa, I'll start with you. I know I met you very briefly, like right
Yes.
after you had moved to St. Louis back in 2012 to take over as executive director at CAM. And the past 8 years, you've had a lot has happened, a lot of highlights. Maybe just talk about sort of some of those highlights, especially as it relates to being recognized for Outstanding Arts Professional.
Sure. Well, first, I think it's such an extraordinary honor to be part of the Visionary Awards, and it's such a wonderful thing to think about all of the women in the same category that I've been recognized, but in all of the categories who have made major contributions to the work and the arts and cultural life of St. Louis. So that's a really wonderful context. And for me, I have to say that it has been an extraordinary experience to be in St. Louis and to be at the Contemporary Art Museum. And it really has been, for me, about trying to learn who St. Louis is and what various communities are and how we could be more and more used by all different kinds of communities. So I think it has really been a time for us to think about accessibility and how can you come to the museum and what is it that it can give you? What is your use for it? How can you think of it not only as a space to sort of learn something about extraordinary art and artists and sort of the artistic movements of our time, but also as a place to really reflect and be able to have your own dialogues with others and also contemplation yourself. So I have sort of think of one of the major moments in the history of the museum since I have been there was several years ago now when we decided that the most singular important thing to change about the museum was its admission and to go from being an institution that charged admission to an institution that was free. And there are several reasons for that. The first part of that is, of course, about accessibility, making sure that anyone who wants to can come and there's no barrier to entry. But I also think it's about a psychology, which is to say, if contemporary art is something that maybe you don't think you know or you don't think you recognize, if something is free and open and welcoming and inclusive, maybe you'll take a chance on it. And we love that idea of just perhaps trying it, seeing what it might mean to you to come in and look at what's on view at any given moment.
No, I think that it's a really important thing. And I think as you're talking, I think sometimes what people perhaps forget, especially in the position that you're in, is there's a lot that goes into making decisions that seem sometimes seemingly simple to the public, but you've got a board of directors, you've got your staff, you've got public input. And I mean, when you're running an arts institution, that's a lot to kind of come into play, whether it's new programming that you're doing for accessibility and outreach to the community or something like just making it free. It's not just making it free. There's a lot that went into that, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it speaks to some of the direction that you've been trying to do for the past years then.
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes you make decisions not because they are the best business decisions, but because they are the best community decisions, because they are the best audience decisions. And I think that's really been at the core of what the museum is. And what I'm really interested in audience and people being able to use these extraordinary resources in this artistic ecosystem of St. Louis. I think sometimes too, it's really important to also think not only about your building, your space, and those walls and what happens within it and how you can invite people in, but it's also really important to think about how you can take some of what might be inside those walls, outside of the walls into various places, whether it be schools within the St. Louis public school system or community centers, and just how you can make institutions permeable, and again, welcoming, accessible, physically, but also psychologically. I think that that's really important.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I think sometimes we don't think about that all the time when it's visual art in a museum.
Yeah.
But that's a great segue actually into Ellie with the work that you do as an artist, but specifically with public art. I was on your website, which is great, by the way. I mean, your work is really awesome, and I love this. I was reading your bio, and it says, an artist obsessed with color, pattern, music, and mathematics, and that your work is this math and data-driven public art. And I know in the first segment, Pat was saying this is the art of the future, but I want you to kind of walk us through some of your work. We've got photos too, and to take a look at that and tell me a bit more about your work and your process.
I'm very much inspired by data, and by using that as kind of a tool to create some sort of game, so there's like interaction in the work. Because I feel like public art, when you put it in the public, it belongs to the public. So when I can create some sort of ownership, either through the implementation of making the work or through just the idea that there's something to discover. So the work kind of looks abstract and geometric, but there's always some sort of like meaning behind it. And that's what's really important to me.
That's really, and so you're saying, and tell me, I mean, like, how does this, your vision, your process work for you? I mean, are you thinking of the colors like first, or is it more of the geometric side of the data? Like, how does it all fit together? Because I know that, again, when I was reading your bio, I love this idea of you seeing yourself as a composer and what that means. So as we're looking at that, tell me how that sort of plays out in the actual process.
I think there's a different approach for every project. I mean, some things, like I was working on visualizing pi for a really long time, and in that it's like it was color coded, so every digit kind of had a color and then a shape and a relationship. But the work is changing a little bit. I've been traveling a lot and doing a lot of residencies, and I've really kind of gained a new relationship to color and how I see color, and this idea that I can kind of collect color in one place and then reflect it in another, and how does color change, and how to use color as a way to connect the work to the space as well. So color plays a little bit of a different role now, I think. So that's
interesting. And is there a different approach that you take when you're doing something outdoors, public art, versus some works that you might do in a gallery, for example, on display for exhibits? How does that work? Is your mind go into a different mode for that?
I mean, honestly, I've been really busy with the public work that I talk about all the time. Like, my studio practice is just, like, I don't have anything to show right now, because everything is like, I don't know, I think I just think large scale. So it's like I can work on sketches, but a lot of the stuff happens in the computer as well. So, I'm working on drawings and things like that. And I think as my work gets more data-driven, it kind of belongs on the computer in a way.
Interesting.
I don't know.
No, that's great. No, thank you for sharing that. I know sometimes it can be hard as an artist. Here you are in a TV studio. It's like, so tell me about your artwork where you're comfortable with your materials in this very tactile way. But no, that was great in explaining that. I want to kind of move into this because we're talking about women and in the arts. There was this article that the National Endowment for the Arts in their arts magazine back in 2018 did this piece, and I thought I'd pull up this part of that article because it applies to this. It said, women artists make up only 3 to 5% of major art museum collections in the US and Europe. And then the article goes on that talks about more women in the arts management, but men predominantly held upper management positions and earn significantly higher salaries than women. And so I want to kind of tie this back both for you as artists, and when the award ceremony comes up, I know sometimes there's a lot of young artists in the audience as well. And there is this battle, right, always going on with gender and how you make your way. And people sometimes think in the arts, oh, it's an easy route. But as we're seeing, it's not necessarily. So I want to kind of go back to that and maybe just ask you both how you see the importance of recognizing women in the arts, and sort of where you would encourage artists to see that there is hope, that they can succeed, and how that applies to you.
I can certainly start by saying one of the really wonderful things about working in the contemporary art world is that a lot of those kind of figures and percentages, which are really dreary and really upsetting, quite frankly, about how few women artists are in larger collections, we don't have to live and die by that, because we are dealing with the art of today and the artists who are making work today. And that group of artists, not just locally, but across the globe, are diverse in all different ways, including who makes up the kind of gender percentages of who's making work. So one of the really, really nice things is that we can actively work against that kind of small percentage of the women that we show, for example, but I think that this is very much the case for contemporary collections that are purchasing work and have collections. We do not have a collection. So for us, it's really about how many different artists in a given year and over many years do we show, who are they, and we can really make sure that we never have to hear a statistic like that. So I think that that's really, really important. In terms of women leaders in the arts, I think it's really interesting. I came from Los Angeles, and in LA, when I was there, there were an extraordinary number of women museum directors in town. A high percentage of the most important museums in Los Angeles and the region were run by women. And then I came here, and we have wonderful, wonderful women leaders of arts and culture organizations here as well. So it's a very, very exciting thing to say that we don't see some of these issues of sort of the top leadership of these institutions being run by men but being staffed by women, because there are a lot of women who are running these institutions here. So we're very lucky in St. Louis that we have that kind of environment. And I feel like those two things are absolutely hopeful and aspirational for young women, either wanting to be arts administrators, curators, or artists. I think you can really look around this particular region and see a completely different set of numbers and facts than what you read to us. I mean, thank goodness, right? And it's a really, really exciting thing to be able to have that.
No, I appreciate you bringing that up. And before we wrap things up, is there anything you wanted to add, add to that, Ellie?
Putting me on the spot.
Not to put you on the spot, but really, I mean, as we wrap things up, I mean, do you feel as an artist that there's anything in terms of, as Lisa pointed out, kind of breaking these barriers or not being, where gender is not necessarily, doesn't have to be considered all the time? And is there anything?
I kind of the opposite. I think gender does need to be considered sometimes, and it just is. I mean, I think as a public artist, it's it's male dominated. Most of the public artists, I would think, and muralists and like graffiti artists and that culture. And I find like when I'm working on a project and I have an assistant that's a male, everybody always goes to the male and asks him about the project. And then he's always like, oh, it's hers. And they're like, oh, okay. But it's interesting that people are like, their biases are checked in those moments. But I mean, I feel like I have to, yell louder, a little bit, and really be confident and find my voice in running my own business and being in the public. So.
No, I appreciate you adding that. I know that's not a lot of time to open that kind of that discussion. I want to thank you both for being here. Thank you both for your time. Congratulations, most importantly. And there's more. For those of you at home, you can hear from them directly. If you go to the Visionary Awards, you can actually hear them stand up on stage and sort of share a bit more about their story, because we only have limited time. It's taking place Monday, April 27th. It's the 2020 St. Louis Visionary Awards. For tickets and more information, go to visawards.org. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you at home for watching, and keep it right here on STL TV, Experience St. Louis.